chairman of Interfaith International, Secretary General of Interfaith International, to have given your time to us, to Baloch Voice Foundation, and to Bolan Times for giving an interview. Sir, Dr. Charles, you are the first prominent person, and your organization, Interfaith International, is the premier organization who raised the voice of Baloch people at different international forums. Since more than a decade, you have been struggling on the issues of Baloch people, including other minorities of the region as well. So today, after a decade, what you say, what you analyze, that what the Baloch issue and the Baloch struggle and the Baloch people have achieved at international forums.
I do not think there has been too much achieved, because in general the whole question which I raised in this last hour about the rights or autonomy of the regions in Pakistan is not a big issue before the United Nations. Pakistan is a nation state, it's a member of the United Nations, an important member of the United Nations, and those matters of internal autonomy of the regions are matters which the state believes belongs to itself. However, at the Commission on Human Rights and at the Human Rights Council, there is a possibility for those people who are members or citizens of a certain state to speak about problems within their states. And if they bring up problems of ethnic discrimination, of oppression by one group over another group, and so on and so forth, if all of these issues come up, it's the best place to speak about those is here in the United Nations at the Human Rights Council. So, but in general, the question of the independence of Balochistan within the United Nations discussion has not been really raised. I mean, this is what we read about in the books, but we don't discuss it in the Human Rights Council because it's an internal question in Pakistan.
Yeah, actually, recently the UN working group on enforced disappearances in September 2012 visited Balochistan and made a report about Baloch missing persons. And since then, the Baloch have an expectations from international community, from UN and its bodies, that now they are asking for an international intervention, particularly for the issue with respect to the issue of human rights, including the most effective issue of Baloch missing persons. So what you think that whether any stage will come that international organizations, particularly UN, will take this issue seriously and ask any sort of international intervention in Balochistan?
I don't think there'll be an international intervention in Balochistan because it's strategically it's extremely difficult. I mean, when you consider when you deal with Balochistan, you're dealing with important oil pipelines from Iran to India. You're dealing with large international economic interests. You're dealing with the interests of China in the region, and so on and so forth. So I doubt very much if there's an intervention. But as I said here, when the troops of the NATO leave Afghanistan next year, 2014, there is some possibility that there will be less pressure upon the various parties, upon Pakistan, upon the United States, upon the allies in NATO, and so there will be less pressure, and it may be some of these issues of Balochistan may come up again with a much less emotional discussion. I mean, that these can be discussed in international conference or whatever. I mean, these things. This is always possible. But at the moment, Balochistan is the forgotten area, and there's very little known in the international media about Balochistan, except on Al Jazeera. There was a program in English a few months ago, but that's about all. And we heard from Baloch leaders. But other than that, it's a forgotten issue.
as you stated, with respect to Gawadar port, Pakistan handed over Gawadar port to China. The Baloch people think that it's manipulation of Baloch resources. The Baloch people think that Pakistan will utilize the Baloch resources for its fundamental aims, objectives, and they see that they are going to utilize the Baloch land, particularly the Gawadar, for strategic designs, despite of any sort of development for the people. So how you analyze this, that what China is going to do with Gawadar port, and why the international community, particularly West and America, is silent on these issues?
Well, as you know, China also owns about 40% of the port of Athens. I mean, this is not something, and of many other ports, I suppose, in Africa. I mean, this is a phenomenon which even Europeans are allowing to happen, to take ports and control them because you have the means and the money to do it. But in that argument, people would say, well, the Baloch people are so poor and they're so backward that it doesn't matter if they get the money from that port or not. But in fact, as you pointed out very well, it's the people's land. It's where they've been for the last 600-700 years, and it's also interesting for China because they need this. They want Iranian oil, which can be pipelined over probably through Kashmir into their own country. And I don't know exactly how they're going to take this to use this resource. And of course, the port, meaning on the Indian Ocean, it means China has a very nice port to import the oil through the ocean. So obviously in their strategic interest, but that's just seems to be incorrect to use for one country, which has a large population, to be using another country's resources. And since Balochistan is part of Pakistan, has been obliged to be part of Pakistan, they should have a right to say yes or no about the use of their own ports.
When we see the statistics that nearly world 20% oil is being transported through Strait of Hormuz, that's close to Gawadar, and if at such strategic location, Pakistan and China, they are going to make some sort of strategic designs, so it will be some sort of disaster, not only to the region, but also a disaster to the international community. So still we do not see any sort of voices which have been raised by the international community to this particular issue. Why? Whether they do not know, or the international diplomats, thinkers, institutes, why they are just keeping their eyes away from Balochistan.
Well, that's not absolutely true because the Active Baloch Committee in the United States, they have a lobby in Washington, I'm sure, and they have been discussing with Dan Rohrabacher and these people in the American Congress he was trying to go to Afghanistan but was prevented from going because of his reputation, whatever that is. And so it's known, especially in the United States, it's known the situation of Balochistan, but at the moment, the high priority of the American government, as I see it, is to get the war finished in Afghanistan and get the troops back home and to concentrate on other matters such as trade with China and this kind of thing. So obviously China is not considered as an enemy but as a partner in the sense of economically speaking. And this is just unfortunate, as always happens. The people of South Asia just don't have the media coverage as they need.
Sir, you are a very prominent human rights defender. Even at UN, when anybody comes and asks about human rights, organizations or personality, you are on that top. And you have a very deep insight of the Balochistan, human rights situation inside the Balochistan. So even today, the subjugation of the people, torture, killings, victimization is going on. What you expect that after this election, the transfer of government from one political party to another political party, do you expect anything that something is can change or something will become positive for the people, particularly of Baloch people?
Well, there are two problems. One is that Balochistan, according to my information I have, did not really want to be part of Pakistan in the first place, which means that there is a conflict situation. And the second is that the people who rule Pakistan are using their own military and pseudo-military, whatever kind of forces to subject the people of Balochistan, even letting the extremists have a big role at Quetta. I mean, they have a large population on Quetta, the extremist population. So this means that how do you stop two things at once? One is the conflict between a people and a nation, and at the same time stop what the nation is doing to those people in order to subjugate them. I mean, this is a very big problem. But I helped Mr. Dashti write his book on Balochistan, which he published last year, and I wrote the introduction to the book. And he traces the whole history of the Baloch people. It's an extremely interesting tradition, which most people don't know. For example, that the Khan of Talat existed for 200 or 300 years, and that this was across national boundaries, and that this was a sort of small kingdom, and so on and so forth. I mean, all these facts, where the Baloch people, how they migrated throughout Iran, and where they came from, and what they are now. All of the whole history of the Baloch people is very interesting. It should be, but Dashti couldn't even get his book published by the Oxford University Press. It's incredible. He had to publish it on his own. I mean, it's just that fact that the movements of people in South Asia have to be better understood, and then the rulers have to be put to the task of trying to solve these problems, particularly in Pakistan, to solve the problem of regional identity. The Sikhs, not the Sikhs, the Sindhis also, they have a big problem. They're fighting the MQM, they're fighting the central government, they have also problems. And all of these should be, but it's not possible, because in the United Nations itself, it's the nations which count, the nations which have the votes. America has a vote, Pakistan has a vote, and India has a vote, and they can decide what they want in the United Nations, and they are providing the Human Rights Council, they're providing the rooms there. So it's an uphill struggle. But I think for the Baloch, it would be very good if the world as a whole would read what the Baloch people have gone through in their history. Then they would understand much better what the problem of Pakistan is.
Rightly, as you said, that the Baloch people do not expect anything from this election and these procedures. So in the same way, particularly the Baloch on families of missing persons, they are hopeless. They do not expect anything from Pakistan judiciary, from the government, or from any institute which is over there. So what you recommend, whether there is any way to get access to the legal institutes, international institutes, either International Criminal Court or European Human Rights Court. So what you recommend is whether there is a legal procedure which can be followed and which we shall follow for the issue of Baloch missing persons.
That is the best way. Someone was very clever who came up with that idea, that the best way to deal with the Baloch issue is to deal with the disappeared persons, because that is an issue which is directly related to a UN-related group and committee, and you can bring information before, and I know since the last 4 or 5 years anyway, that the Baloch disappeared persons, even in the UPR, we were already 5 years ago, people were trying to make papers about the number of Baloch people who had disappeared to present to the UPR. That was already started. Now, even as you mentioned, we even have a special representative of this group has visited, if I understand, has visited Pakistan and so on. That was the best, because many of the Baloch were arrested and they were just in prison. They disappeared. And the disappearances is something you can deal with in the courts, because the judges they can influence a policeman who keep the people in prison. I mean, there is a direct relation between the judges, the United Nations, the state, the judges, and the prisons. I mean, it's something you can work upon. And so that was a good idea to deal with disappeared persons rather than dealing with the struggle between Balochistan and Pakistan. I mean, what can you do in the United Nations except the right of self-determination, which many countries don't believe in.
So, with respect to diplomatic forums, what you recommend that how the Baloch people can get attention of the international community, particularly of Western countries, institutions, organizations. So, what you recommend that how the Baloch people shall proceed through the diplomatic channel?
I would also use, if I were you, the Khan of Kalat. I mean, I would use his because he's apparently able to travel outside of the UK, and he should, because many people still like monarchies and this kind of thing in the world. I mean, British monarchy still gets lots of attention and so on. The European monarchies and so on. Even in Malaysia and Thailand, the monarchy gets attention. So the Khan of Kalat, although he's not too active, people should know about him more. He should be, although he's not coming here, although he sent some representatives here in the past. That's a good thing. I mean, to get a little bit of idea of what Balochistan is, what its history is, use the Khan of Kalat more. But the problem is that there's too many different groups in Balochistan which are going in different directions, and the Khan is not that popular, so I'm sure it doesn't work very well. But okay, that's one thing. The other is to try to work on these disappearances within the United Nations, and eventually have somebody try to call a conference on Balochistan. I mean, they're calling a conference on Syria. Nobody agrees on Syria. They hope to have a conference on Syria. At least they give the idea of having a conference on Syria. And the Russians, which is a very important country, the Russians agree, more or less, to do it. So if anybody is willing to speak up against China, which isn't very easy these days, I mean, why not try to have a conference on what's happening in Balochistan? It can be several Baloch groups, plus some countries, Norway, or I don't know, some neutral countries, Sweden, or some who would support some kind of a beginning conference, preliminary conference and try to do it without any particular criticism of any country, but just get the people to discuss, have a few experts that talk about the history of Balochistan, who the people are, why they didn't want to be part of Pakistan, etc., etc., and up to the present day, and what's happening to the resources, the oil, and the gas, and the role of China, and so on. Why not have a conference somewhere, which could be sponsored by Baloch leadership? I don't know who, someone has to pay for it. I don't know how to do it, but
as you stated, with respect to disunity, that has been a very weaker point of the Baloch society. Because of that, they have suffered, they are suffering. For getting together, what you recommend the different Baloch groups, because most of them, almost all of them, very well. So what you recommend them to get united, and how they shall come together on a platform?
Well, that's it's not for me to say. As I said, I read Dashti's book. I happened to get an idea that there are various tribes, I think, I would say up to 10 or 12 different groups of Baloch who, in history, some have been more important at one period of history, others have been more important. Like today, you have the Buktis and the Maris and the Mengal, very important people because they speak in the West and this kind of thing. But I don't think it's that which divides the people. I think it's just the fact that any oppressed people is divided by nature. Everyone's trying to do the best they can to solve the problem, and it's not possible. You have to take a majority of the groups. If if you can get it, and try to make some, which is happening. I mean, I see even in London, some groups work together, there's this and that. But if you could get the Pakistan government to attend a conference, and on the other hand, like they're doing with Syria, on the other hand, have Baluch opposition attend at the same time, and have a reasonable discussion at a very low level at the beginning, it could even China. I mean, this conference on Syria, they don't want to invite Iran, but they should invite Iran. They should invite all the partners, if possible. And of course, if they don't want to come, they don't have to come. But I mean, there should be discussion on Baluchistan, international discussion on Baluchistan. It's a very important region.
Thank you, Dr. Charles Dev, and thankful to you for giving us your time.